Slade and I were having lunch the other day, and I'm Sheryl Sitz, and we were talking about some of the services that she offers and things that she sees. And Rosemary mentioned picky eaters, and I had to laugh because if there's one thing I'm not, it's a picky eater. Rosemary, what is a picky eater?
Hi, Sheryl.
Hi.
Yeah, I remember that lunch. We talked about it briefly a little bit. A lot of people refer to picky eaters, and they're not using the same language as somebody who's an occupational therapist or a speech language pathologist who's in the field using that terminology. So really a picky eater is technically somebody, it's a child, could be an adult, technically somebody who has a pretty decent food repertoire of at least 20, 25 foods, and then they'll go on a food jag, and they may drop down to one or two foods, but then they'll pick back up and they'll go ahead and eat, and it's usually a variety of foods as well. A lot of people are referring to picky eaters, and they're really talking about what we in the business call problem feeders. And those children are the children who cry, gag, spit, have meltdowns, and usually only have 3 to 4 foods that they'll eat. And typically those foods are simple carbohydrates, like Cheerios with no milk, but they'll drink the milk, but not on the Cheerios. It has to be separate. And they'll drink copious amounts of milk. Some kids drink 2 to 3 gallons of milk a day. Or they'll eat only one color of food. I've seen colors be a theme. Or they'll only eat chicken nuggets from, say, McDonald's, or something only from Chick-fil-A, or something only from Burger King.
What's driving this in the child?
I think there's a lot of variables that are driving this whole thing in a child. This is where it gets tricky. You have to, number one, there's usually a problem, and the parent has clearly identified that there is a problem. And then oftentimes, it's usually the mom, so I'm going to say the mom. Oftentimes the mom realizes there's a problem, recognizes there's a problem, and everybody else is telling her there's not really a problem and they'll grow out of it. Time goes on, and then there becomes a habit and a relationship that is revolving around the child and how painful it might be for the child to eat, how scary from a sensory integration perspective that there's this food coming at them. They may not have the motor skills to be able to swallow correctly, and so they might be almost drowning in the liquid. The liquid might be, if they're drinking milk, the liquid might be coming too fast. They may have other medical issues like gastric reflux. They may have an intolerance to the food that they're consuming. They may have been in the hospital and had an NG tube, which means that they've had a tube put down their nose and into their stomach, and that irritates the throat. They may have had a lot of other medical procedures. And so there's a lot of trauma around children with eating. So that's a loaded question, and thank you for that. Sometimes children can have like birth trauma as well. If you're a premature child, if you're extreme preemie, oftentimes they're in the hospital for months in a layette, tube fed. They're getting their medical needs met, and then we address the eating issues later. If you're not a extreme preemie, perhaps you've had heart issues or something like that. Once again, you've had medical issues, and so the feeding and the eating piece gets put down through the NG tube, or perhaps through a G tube or a GJ tube, which are tubes that go directly into the stomach or directly into the jejunum in case they can't tolerate food going into the stomach.
So it sounds to me, if I'm hearing this right, like it's something that they've developed to cope with something that's happened to them, and there's probably a fear in there that if they don't do it this way, it's going to hurt, or it's going to go the wrong way, or something bad's going to happen.
Correct. That is, those children that I'm describing in that realm typically will be receiving or should receive the services of a professional, because it's going to be a long road. We're addressing sensory, we're addressing a whole lot of issues, motor, swallowing ability, all sorts of things, and family interaction and family dynamics among those things. Then there's another group that are they don't have these major medical issues, But they have problems, and it's usually they fight, they fuss, as infants, they can't latch on if they're breastfeeding, they're gulping air, they're just having a real hard time. And I work in the homes, and I'll go to homes and moms will pull out these big storage containers, Tupperware storage containers by this time the child's 9 months old, with at least 12 different bottles that she's tried, sippy cups, open cups. And it's heartbreaking because the mom at this point is pretty challenged and burnt out. And,
yeah,
there's a lot of things going on. And
the child can feel that too. Poor mom is at her wit's end, and the child is feeling mom's frustration and feeling frustrated too. I can see how the dynamics in the family can expand on this a lot.
Exactly. The big thing, just us as human beings and women in particular, we have a baby and it's the light of our lives and we want to nurture it. And there's a big feedback that goes between mom and infant, mom and baby. Huge feedback loop. You feed the child is receiving there's a lot of love and a lot of feedback going on between the two. And when you have a child who has challenges with eating, it becomes frustrating. The feedback loop is broken, and then it starts becoming the problem. And mom's frustrated, the baby's frustrated, dad's frustrated. Other family members come in and start providing their very best advice, and a lot of it.
And what was a connection of love that you started out describing has become a connection of frustration and anxiety.
Indeed. And it becomes the problem becomes larger and larger, and the mom's talking to the doctor about the problem. And sometimes the doctor will say, he'll grow out of it. And I hear that a lot. I hear that with 5-year-olds, that the doctor said, and I'm not blaming doctors, I'm just saying from the doctor's perspective, perhaps that child would grow out of it. But a red flag for anybody would be if you've told your doctor 2 or 3 times that you've got concerns and you have a feeling in your gut that there's something wrong with going on, please do take the time and effort to get your needs met and find a professional that will help you, because this can be addressed, and the sooner it's addressed, the easier it is to deal with. I've worked with 14-year-old boys who only will eat 2 things, and then you've got this whole social thing going on, and they're in school most of the time, so you can't control what they're eating, and you can't control their environment. So I always recommend getting in as soon as possible.
Well, yeah, it's becoming more and more deeply ingrained in the child. It's becoming a divide in the family, and that idea that the child will grow out of it, at what expense? How much love is going to get lost? How much time of connection and bonding is going to be broken waiting for the child to just grow out of it?
Exactly. So the problem becomes larger than life. And pretty soon, everything is talking about the problem. And then we have professionals coming in, talking about the problem, typically in front of the child, because the child won't eat. Child is not eating. The child won't eat, can't eat, only eats these 2 things.
The child becomes the problem in our language, and they hear that and they feel that, and what's wrong with me, and how do I please mommy and daddy, and why can't I do this?
And also, conversely, I'm getting a lot of attention for the not eating piece of it. And I get moms' undivided attention all day long. I've seen moms follow their children around with a spoon all day long and leave food out for their children all day long, hoping that they will put something in their mouth and eat. It morphs into this weird dynamic where the kid's actually becoming more in charge of what's going on, and because they're getting this reinforcement for the behavior. So that's also the challenging piece.
You and I have a lot of conversations about awareness. We have found that awareness is like this magic that can happen in so many situations. How can awareness help this situation?
What a lovely, lovely question, because in my website, on my blog, I do write about awareness, but sometimes it's easier to just hear about awareness and how the very words that we use influence our reality. So if we're saying he won't eat, he can't eat, or she won't eat, she can't eat, makes me so mad. They're lazy, they're whatever those words are, that their language is, that they're labeling the situation.
We're reinforcing that.
And creating our reality in that way.
Wow.
Yes.
The very last thing mom and dad want to do.
Exactly. And then grandmother comes on, and grandfather or aunt or sister or uncle or in-laws, outlaws, teachers, therapists, doctors. Everybody's got their opinion. And so then we're going to try this thing, and we're going to try that thing, and so says this, and so says that. And if you're not going to eat now, right, so it just gets ballooned into this big, massive challenge.
And the child is a sponge for all of this language, soaking it up and becoming what we're putting on them.
Exactly. And also, children are really in tune to energy. Even if a lot of the children that I work with, they don't have a lot of language ability. However, every child I meet has got a real good awareness about people's energy and energy levels, and they can feel the shifting in energy and that sort of thing. So because a child does not speak, does not mean that they are not aware. And they're aware at a different level, and they can actually control things from an energetic perspective.
Wow. So just to clarify, as a child that's not able to communicate, I'm probably hypersensitive to what I'm feeling, and I'm using what I'm feeling to possibly manipulate and control situations in my favor or to what I want, just like all kids tend to do with words. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Wow.
Exactly. Our spoken word, we really use or interpret about, I don't know, I've read statistics, 7% of our cognition and our pulling in of data is from the spoken word. 7, I can't remember the exact numbers. The larger number, 50 to 75 to 80%, is through unspoken words. And then there's, in my opinion, there's also that energetic piece that that hasn't been discussed much, but appears to be talked about more. And when I see that happening in families, I'm more likely to bring it up.
And I think we can all at least recognize that we can feel when someone's angry without them saying a word. Even if they're stone-faced, just no expression, we can feel anger. Likewise, we can feel sadness. Those tend to be the ones that almost everyone can say, oh, I felt that before. And that's energy. That's the energy or the frequency of the emotion.
That's very true. And joy also.
Yes.
Joy and happiness.
Yes.
So people can relate to those very easily. And then the other ones, most caregivers are really quite in tune with their children. They let their brain take over, and they let other people's opinions take over.
Especially the quote-unquote experts.
Especially the quote-unquote experts. I was talking to a mom just recently, and her child is 35 years old with autism. One of the problems was that he wouldn't take a particular vitamin because there was no data behind it. And the doctor said that there was no data behind it. And the mom was telling me about this, and I said, well, realistically, he's had a 35-year history of going to a professional that has pronounced whatever it is that's going on. And it really brought home to me the faith that people put in the medical community when they say something that is just a casual, offhand remark, and people take it as gospel.
Yes, that's so true. And especially when we're trying desperately to do what's best for our child, we're reaching out for anything, and we tend to lose confidence in the fact that our mother's instinct or father's instinct is generally quite strong and quite right if we'll listen to it.
And I totally agree with you on that piece, and it's my awareness of this piece of it. I didn't bring that to my practice for many, many years. I was the expert who rolled on in and said, let's try this. I was speaking in front of the child and doing all of those things that I'm telling you now that I see in retrospect were less than beneficial for the family. Now I believe that if I work with a family, I much prefer to, if I'm going to say things about the child, I prefer to say them when the child is not in my presence. If we're working on some feelings, some strategies, things like that. The medical profession takes the position of a deficit level, working from deficits and the things that they cannot do. So the child hears over and over and over what they cannot do.
Yes.
As we reframe and start looking at what the child can do and what the parent can do and what the successes are, as we start reframing those, I believe it starts creating a shift in the way things are. If our thoughts are creating our reality, if our words are creating our reality, would it not make sense that the words we're using, if we're going to create a new reality that the child is eating, that the child is in the family are having a good time and in a loving relationship, wouldn't it make sense to start languaging things around that?
You help families create more of what they want instead of what they don't want through their language, through their practices, through their behavior.
That is my goal. Absolutely my goal. Yes.